it's just people will like brag about being mentally ill nowadays.
What's
like,
a badge of
hold
honor?
on. Yeah, exactly. It's like, well,
neurodivergent, Seamus.
Yeah, then like believe. I know, and listen, we're all they're neuroatypical, and me with my typical neurons over here, I could just never understand. It's like if you're gonna sit here and brag about being mentally ill, I'm sorry, like I'm not gonna take your advice on how to live my life or how the country should be run.
People are not only bragging about it, but they will self-diagnose just so they can say that they're mentally ill. They may not actually have a mental illness. They might just be a little on the neurotic side, and they'll say, "Oh, well, I have this, I have that," and they'll tell everybody. They'll put it in their bios on X or whatever, so that way they get the attention from other people saying, "Oh, I'm sorry," and the virtue points, you know.
Aside from the fact that
victimhood is a currency.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, aside from the fact that she looks like the love child of Keith Olbermann and Mark Cuban, you know, in the 2016 debate, Trump rose to prominence because he roasted her on the debate stage. So it kind of makes sense that Rosie O'Donnell, out of anyone, would be taking pills as a result of, you know, Donald Trump becoming president.
It does make sense. You know, she got significantly embarrassed by him. But I mean, I don't know that there's a great way to figure out who should and should not be prevented from voting because of the medication they're on. You know, it would be weaponized. Any power you give to the government is going to be weaponized against you. I mean, look at what's happened with the Patriot Act. Everyone was gung-ho about it back then, and whereas I understand the impulse, you don't want people that are crazy or neurotic or whatever deciding the direction of the country. At the same time, any power you give to the federal government is a weapon that you're giving to the federal government.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't think anyone's like actually seriously suggesting that, but it's kind of an interesting question to ask, and in part because we have this default assumption right now that voting is this very important thing that can decide the future of our country, and every vote counts, but also our default position should be that every adult is allowed to vote. And I just think that's ridiculous. If voting is this very important thing, then it needs to be taken seriously. And we need to ensure that somebody is of a certain level of consideration or concern or status to actually have any kind of stake in the future of the system. So, for example, I just think it's an insane idea that a father of 6 who's worked hard his entire life to provide for his family can have his vote canceled out by some 18-year-old who just took out $200,000 in student debt to go to art school. Like, I think it's silly to say that everyone should just get an equal say. And by the way, there is no justification for that argument I've heard, which doesn't just apply to communism as a concept. It's always, well, everything needs to be equal for everyone. We need to ensure everyone has an equal say. I'm sorry, we don't. Some people are more qualified to make decisions and have more of an incentive to make choices that are in line with the long-term flourishing of our country.
That's why I feel I should be in charge of Freedom Tunes.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. No, we need to equally distribute all of the decision-making power for Freedom Tunes.
Yes. So even the leftists can help write you jokes.
Yeah, exactly. We have to allow that. We have to allow that.
You know what's kind of crazy is I was just thinking about the olden days, like, you know, 1600s or whatever, and it was quite difficult to survive relative to today. That just meant that like mentally ill people did not survive.
No. Yeah.
And so all the people of sound survival mind survived, and they would vote and they would have kids. But over a long enough period of time with technological advancements, we've created a society where we now have a critical mass of people who are otherwise incapable of making decisions for themselves, and they do vote. The weight of that becomes a lot to bear for any society. I believe will ultimately result inadvertently into a system that once again becomes harsh and chaotic, resulting in people losing their lives.
Yeah, I actually have a slightly different take. I agree with the general sentiment, but I would say that our modern life incentivizes and promotes and even just flat out pushes people into ways of life that are so unnatural that people who would otherwise be mentally healthy become mentally ill. What is an illness? Well, sometimes you have congenital illnesses. You'll have mental illnesses that are just a product of a person's genetics or birth. But just like with physical illness, sometimes, many times, you're sick because you've treated yourself improperly. You've behaved improperly. You ate the wrong kinds of foods or didn't exercise enough.
Like gluten.
And I think the same thing is true of mental health, but we don't want to acknowledge it. People will actually see a deterioration in their own mental health when they live in immoral, unnatural ways. And so many of us are right now.
I actually think a large component of mental instability right now with identity crises is due to mass media and to a great degree cartoons. And I'm not joking. So for almost the entirety of human civilization, moving pictures didn't exist. Humans identified with other humans for the most part. I'm sure there were people who identify with animals in weird ways, but they probably would not survive very well, or they just grow up surrounded by wolves or something. But now you have people who actually identify as cartoons, things that are not real.
Don't look at me.
But they begin to identify things in the real world as if they were cartoonish or should be. You know, I just think like I saw this tweet about Mr. Rogers. And it said, watch Mr. Rogers and compare it to children's programming today. And that's exactly what I'm talking about.
I saw the same tweet.
Yeah, Mr. Rogers is like, hello there, neighbor. This is a train. Trains carry people from one place to the next. And it's like he's a calm adult talking like an adult to kids. Now you look at modern kid stuff on YouTube. And it's
toilet.
Like, I mean, that's not really for kids, but kids watch it. But you had Elsagate. Joker running around chasing a pregnant Elsa with a giant syringe and stabbing her in the butt with it. That's exactly what it was.
Very weird.
Or like there's like big fat guys who make weird noises and scream at the camera, and kids, like parents put their kids in front of it. I'm like, these kids are going to grow up with severe mental disabilities because these kids. Okay, do you guys remember that video where it's like the 1950s and the kids, they're talking like this? I quite find the politics of Liechtenstein a bit appalling when you bring it to tax policy. And everyone's like, how are they sounding so smart? The kid's like 9 years old. It's because they grew up surrounded by people who talked like that, and they talked the way they were trained, they were raised to talk. Now kids are growing up watching weirdo cartoons and crackpot BS. And with the modern school, this is why we got to go to the Department of Education. Kids are being raised by other kids. It's like, You take two people who have two young people who have no idea how the world works, put them next to each other, and they're going to keep bouncing nonsense off each other and then developing crazy ideas. That's what we're getting.
Yeah, and things have gotten progressively worse over time, right? We went from teaching Latin in grammar school to remedial English in colleges and universities.
I blame media.
Yeah, I think the media is a big part of it. I think another part of it is just the idea of mass education in general and not structuring it in a way that actually took into account the fact that different people have a different capacity for learning. But that said, media is a large part of it. Even just the medium itself, watching something as opposed to reading. Obviously, reading something is something that requires a bit more discipline and it'll build brain power. And we're all guilty of this, right? It's just easier to watch something than it is to read it. But the content of what people are watching. You mentioned Mr. Rogers. He spoke to kids in a very grown-up way. And then when I was a kid, we had like Teletubbies, which is just the most insane acid trip ever placed on television. And it's
And they don't even
kids.
speak. They don't even speak.
They just say gibberish. It's like, that's probably not good for a developing brain.
Yeah, and there's a burning baby head flying through the sky.
Through the sky. It's a horrifying world.
There are people that believe that if you read to your children, you're giving your children an unfair advantage over kids that don't have parents that can read to them.
Good.
And yes, absolutely, you should read to your kids.
Make your kid read to you.
Well, once they can, it makes sense. But the point is, like, children should be like, you should engage with your children as if they are small adults, not expect them to do things that adults do, but you should talk to them slowly and clearly, and you shouldn't do baby talk with them. Like, you shouldn't do any of that stuff because they're going to absorb what they hear. So you want them to hear properly articulated English so that way they can absorb that, and that will get them to the point where that will give them an advantage when it comes time to learn. You can start teaching your children about letters when they're like 2. You don't have to be like, oh, you must know this, but you can start exposing them to things that they're going to need to know, like when they're a year and a half. It's like, you don't have to wait until they're like, 4 or 5 to be like, okay, well, now you're going to start learning. Because
also, like,
stop
don't give them an iPad.
Actually, I think iPad's fine so long as you're playing like BBC Wild Earth or Quantum Physics or something. The problem is parents put the iPad in front of the kids, press play on some random psychobabble nonsense where there's a dog going, blah, 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 and then the kids just
I worked hard on that. I worked really hard on that video, and I don't appreciate you denigrating it. But no, it's sorry, I totally interrupted.
What's Attenborough's first name?
David
Attenborough? Okay, so I thought. Like, if your kid, you want to be entertained, here's a video about frogs.
Yeah.
Like, play things that's actually, I still remember the Nintendo Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 password for level select. and 10 lives. It's BA, BA, up, down, BA, left, right, BA, start. Play that on Nintendo. Go find one. Play Ninja Turtles 2. Put that in at the start screen, and you will get the level select. Why do I know that?
Because you were a kid, you absorb it, and it
I know.
stays there. Yeah.
And I'm just like, the things that kids are, you're telling your kids they will never forget.
Well,
and if it's not something they can consciously remember, it'll be the fabric of their being.
And it's extremely dark when you consider the fact that there are many things that we used to consider to be very inappropriate for children that we're now trying to expose children to. So we try to slip sexual perversion into basically everything now. There will be children's shows that show mastectomy scars as the result of sex change procedures.
Unreal.
That will have to show a character with two dads. But then we won't expose kids to realities that we used to be comfortable exposing them to. So if you watch children's films from the 80s or 70s or earlier, people die, right? And there are scary situations. We've done this strange thing where we've sanitized children's media to the point where there are no stakes and there isn't any real lesson to learn beyond be yourself. And nothing unfortunate or terrible or permanently bad happens to the protagonist, so no real message has any kind of impact.
Yep.
But then we'll slip in a bunch of really disgusting perversion that children really shouldn't be exposed to.
Yeah.
Is that it? It's Seamus.
We solved it. Yeah, I solved it. Well, no, I mean, but it's funny because we'll say, well, like a child is too innocent to see a film where something scary happens. No, they aren't. Kids get scared all the time.
Yep.
Kids get scared all the time. And it should be something that's embraced in the sense that you can package a moral lesson into a story that has frightening elements. But what kids should not be exposed to are like mastectomy scars because of a sex change, or this sexual pervert identifies, as a woman even though he's a man. Like, those are things children should not be exposed to.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.